What if the homeless man everyone ignored at the diner wasn't homeless at all, but a billionaire testing whether anyone still remembered what kindness looked like? Emma Carter, 22, had worked at Joe's Roadside Diner in rural Virginia for 3 years while putting herself through community college. $2.13 an hour plus tips. Night shift. She knew every crack in the vinyl booths, every stain on the floor, every customer who left quarters instead of dollars. But she'd never seen the old man before. He appeared one cold November evening, shuffling through the door with a military jacket 3 sizes too big, boots held together with duct tape, and a face weathered by decades of something Emma couldn't quite name. Not just age. Something heavier. He sat in the corner booth, the one nobody wanted because the heater didn't reach it, and studied the menu with hands that trembled slightly. Emma approached with her notepad and warmest smile. "Evening, sir. What can I get you?" The old man looked up. His eyes were pale blue, clear despite the exhaustion around them. "How much is the soup?" $4.50, Emma replied gently. He pulled out a small zipper bag and counted coins slowly. Quarters. Dimes. Nickels. After a long minute, he looked up, embarrassed. "I've got $3.20, he said quietly. Could I just get a cup of coffee?" "Black is fine." Before Emma could respond, restaurant owner Joe Mitchell stormed over from behind the counter. At 58, Joe had owned this diner for 30 years and had very specific ideas about who belonged in his establishment. "Sir," Joe said loudly, making sure nearby customers could hear. "This is a paying establishment. If you can't afford food, there's a shelter 12 miles down Route 29. They serve free meals." The old man's face flushed. "I can pay for coffee." "Coffee's for paying customers ordering food," Joe interrupted. "I'm not running a charity. You need to leave." Emma's stomach twisted. She'd seen Joe do this before, turn away people who looked wrong, people whose appearance didn't match the diner's image. But something about this old man made her heart ache in a way she couldn't explain. Maybe it was the military jacket. Her father had served in Vietnam and never talked about it. Came home different, her mother said. Broken in ways that didn't show. Or maybe it was simpler than that. Maybe it was just wrong to humiliate an old man for being hungry. Emma made a choice that would cost her a week's pay, or change her entire life. "Actually," Emma said, her voice steady despite her racing heart, "he's with me. I'm buying his meal." Joe turned to her, eyes narrowing. "What?" "I said I'm paying for his food. Soup, coffee, and..." She glanced at the old man, who was staring at her like she'd just performed a miracle, a slice of apple pie. "My treat." Joe's face reddened. "Carter, we've talked about this. You can't use your employee discount for..." "I'm not using my discount," Emma interrupted. "I'm paying full price. With my own money. Is that against the rules?" For a long moment, Joe stared at her. Then at the old man. Then back at Emma. "Fine," he muttered. "But this comes out of your pocket. And if he causes any trouble, you're both gone." He stalked back to the counter, making his disapproval clear to everyone in the diner. Emma turned to the old man, whose eyes were wet. "What's your name, sir?" "Walter," he said softly. "Walter Briggs. Nice to meet you, Walter. I'm Emma. One soup, coffee, and pie coming right up." As she walked to the kitchen to place his order, she didn't notice Walter pulling out a cell phone, an iPhone, not the flip phone you'd expect from someone counting quarters for soup. She didn't see him send a brief text message, "Found one. Joe's Roadside Diner, Route 29, Virginia. Status, genuine." And she definitely didn't see the response that came back immediately, "Confirmed. Extraction in 3 hours." Emma just brought Walter his soup, sat with him during her break, and listened as he told stories about serving in Vietnam, about losing his wife to cancer, about the decades that had somehow slipped away until he found himself alone and forgotten. What Emma didn't know was that Walter Briggs wasn't homeless. He was Walter Briggs III, billionaire philanthropist and CEO of Briggs Foundation, worth $8.7 billion. And he'd been testing American restaurants for 6 months, documenting how they treated people who looked like they had nothing. Joe's Roadside Diner was the 47th establishment Walter had visited. Emma Carter was the first person who'd passed the test. And in exactly 3 hours, her life was about to change in ways she couldn't imagine. If you believe kindness costs nothing but means everything, comment respect. Emma Carter's life was a careful balance of exhaustion and determination. By day, she attended Northern Virginia Community College, studying business management with a minor in hospitality. By night, she worked the 6 p.m. to 2 a.m. shift at Joe's Diner, surviving on coffee, adrenaline, and the hope that someday her degree would lead somewhere better than this. Her apartment was a studio above a laundromat, $6.50 a month, utilities not included. The heat barely worked. The shower had 2 temperatures, scalding or frozen. But it was hers, paid for with her own money, and that mattered. Her mother had died when Emma was 16, cancer, like Walter's wife. Her father had passed 2 years later, liver failure from drinking away the grief. Emma had been on her own ever since, working her way through life one shift at a time. She'd learned early that the world wasn't kind to people who struggled. She'd seen it in the way landlords looked at her when she paid rent in cash. In the way professors dismissed students who worked full-time. In the way customers at the diner treated staff like they were invisible, or worse, like they were inconveniences. But Emma had also learned something else, that small acts of kindness mattered. That treating people with dignity cost nothing. That sometimes the only thing standing between someone and complete despair was a stranger who gave a damn. So when she saw Walter Briggs counting quarters with shaking hands, she didn't see a problem to be removed. She saw her father. She saw herself. She saw every person who'd ever been made to feel like they didn't belong. And she decided that not today. Not in front of her. Walter Briggs III sat in the corner booth of Joe's Diner, eating the soup a 22-year-old waitress had just bought him with her own money, and remembered why he'd started this experiment in the first place. 6 months ago, Walter had been in his penthouse office overlooking Manhattan when his granddaughter, Claire, had called him crying. She was 19, a sophomore at NYU, and she'd been volunteering at a homeless shelter in Brooklyn. A veteran, a man who'd served 3 tours in Afghanistan, had been turned away from a restaurant because he smelled bad and looked dangerous. The veteran's name was Marcus. He'd been suffering from PTSD, living on the streets for 2 years, trying to get help from a VA system that was overwhelmed and underfunded. Marcus had committed suicide 3 days later. Left a note saying, "I fought for this country, but this country doesn't want me anymore." Claire had been devastated. And Walter, listening to his granddaughter sob over the phone, had made a decision. He was going to find out how America really treated its most vulnerable people. Not through reports or statistics, but by experiencing it himself. So Walter created a plan. He would dress as a homeless veteran, military jacket, worn boots, no shower for days, and visit restaurants, diners, and cafes across America. He would see how they treated him. Whether they showed compassion or contempt. Whether anyone still remembered that dignity wasn't determined by a bank account. He hired a small team to document everything. To record interactions. To identify establishments that passed the test, and those that failed spectacularly. Joe's Roadside Diner was the 47th location. And Emma Carter was the first person in 6 months who treated him like a human being without hesitation, without judgment, without expecting anything in return. She'd paid for his meal out of her own pocket, money she clearly couldn't spare, simply because it was the right thing to do. Walter had learned what he needed to know. Now it was time to reveal the truth. At 9:47 p.m., Emma was wiping down tables when she heard it. The low rumble of engines. Not the usual pickups and sedans that frequented Joe's diner, but something deeper. More powerful. She looked up through the window. 3 black SUVs were pulling into the parking lot. Not just any SUVs. Mercedes G-Wagons. The kind that cost more than most people made in 5 years. The diner went quiet. Even Joe stopped mid-complaint to stare. The vehicles parked in perfect formation. Doors opened simultaneously. From the first SUV stepped a man in an expensive suit. From the second, a woman with a leather portfolio. From the third, a team of people with cameras and recording equipment. And from the middle SUV stepped Walter Briggs. Except he didn't look like Walter the homeless veteran anymore. He was clean, shaven, wearing a perfectly tailored charcoal suit that probably cost more than Emma's car. His posture was different, straighter, commanding. The trembling hands were gone, replaced by confident authority. Emma's mouth fell open. Walter walked through the diner door, and every eye in the restaurant followed him. Joe Mitchell turned pale. "Good evening," Walter said, his voice no longer quiet or hesitant but clear and powerful. "My name is Walter Briggs III. I'm the CEO of Briggs Foundation." He gestured to his team. "For the past 6 months, my organization has been conducting a nationwide study on how American businesses treat homeless veterans. We've visited 47 establishments." His eyes found Emma, who was frozen in place, still holding a dish rag. "Tonight, for the first time, we found someone who passed the test." The diner was so quiet you could hear the fluorescent lights humming. Walter Briggs stood in the center of Joe's Roadside diner, surrounded by his team, cameras rolling, every customer frozen in their seats. "Emma Carter," Walter said, looking directly at her. 3 hours ago, you spent $11.47 of your own money you earned working an 8-hour shift for $2.13 an hour plus tips, to buy a meal for a stranger you believed was homeless. Emma's hands trembled. She couldn't speak. "You didn't do it for recognition," Walter continued. "You didn't do it because anyone was watching. You did it because you saw another human being who was hungry and humiliated, and you decided that wasn't acceptable." He stepped closer. "Do you know what makes that extraordinary? In the past 6 months, I've been turned away from 46 restaurants. I've been called a bum, a vagrant, a liability. I've been told to leave, threatened with police, physically escorted out. At one establishment in Ohio, the owner actually called the cops and had me arrested for trespassing." Murmurs rippled through the diner. "But you," Walter said, his voice softening, "you saw a veteran wearing a military jacket and remembered that service means something. You saw an elderly man counting quarters and remembered dignity. You saw a human being and acted like one yourself." Emma's eyes filled with tears. I couldn't let him leave hungry." "No," Walter agreed. "You couldn't. Because you have something most people have lost, empathy that doesn't calculate cost." He turned to face Joe Mitchell, who had gone from pale to green. "Mr. Mitchell," Walter said, his tone cooling significantly. "You, on the other hand, failed spectacularly." Joe opened his mouth, but no sound came out. "You told a veteran, a man who served this country, to go to a shelter 12 miles away instead of allowing him to sit quietly and drink coffee. You prioritized the image of your establishment over basic human decency. You humiliated him publicly." Walter's team stepped forward, one of them holding a tablet showing footage from a hidden camera Walter had been wearing. "We have everything documented," Walter said. "Your words. Your tone. Your complete lack of compassion. And as of tomorrow morning, this footage will be part of our national report on how American businesses treat veterans and homeless individuals." Joe's face went from green to gray. "Mr. Briggs, I didn't know." "You didn't know I was a billionaire," Walter interrupted. "But that shouldn't matter. You should have treated me with dignity regardless of who I was or what I could afford. That's the point." He turned back to Emma. Which brings me to why I'm here. Walter nodded to the woman with the leather portfolio. She stepped forward and handed Emma an envelope. Inside that envelope, Walter said, you'll find 3 things. First, a check for $50,000 as a thank you for your kindness and to help with your college expenses. Emma gasped, nearly dropping the envelope. Second, a full scholarship to any 4-year university of your choice, funded by the Briggs Foundation. Tuition, housing, books, everything covered. Tears streamed down Emma's face now. She couldn't stop them. And third, Walter continued, his own eyes glistening, a job offer. Briggs Foundation is launching a new initiative, hospitality consulting for businesses that want to train their staff in compassionate service. We need someone who doesn't just understand hospitality in theory, but lives it in practice. We'd like you to lead that program. Salary, $85,000 annually, with full benefits and relocation assistance if needed. The diner erupted. Customers started clapping. Some were crying. Even the cook had come out from the kitchen, wiping his eyes with his apron. Emma couldn't speak. She just stared at Walter, at the envelope in her shaking hands, at this impossible moment that didn't feel real. You don't have to answer now, Walter said gently. Take time. Think about it. But know this, what you did tonight wasn't small. It was everything. And the world needs more people like you. As the applause died down, Walter turned back to Joe Mitchell, who stood behind his counter like a statue. Mr. Mitchell, Walter said, his voice carrying authority that filled every corner of the diner. I want to be clear about something. I'm not here to destroy your business. I'm here to give you a choice. Joe swallowed hard. A choice? Yes. Option 1, our report gets published as planned. Footage of how you treated me goes public. Your business faces the consequences of being featured in a national study on establishments that fail basic human decency. Joe's hands gripped the counter edge. Option 2, Walter continued, you commit, publicly, right now, to changing your policies. You implement mandatory compassion training for all staff. You create a Pay It Forward program where customers can pre-purchase meals for people who can't afford them. You post a sign saying, everyone welcome, regardless of ability to pay. And you issue a public apology, not to me, but to every person you've turned away from this diner because they didn't meet your standards of appropriate. The diner was silent again. Every eye on Joe. If you choose option 2, Walter said, Briggs Foundation will partner with you. We'll fund the training. We'll help promote the changes. We'll turn your diner into a model for other businesses. But the work has to be real. The change has to be genuine. No more humiliating people for being poor. No more judging worth by appearance. Joe looked around the diner, at his customers watching him, at Emma still clutching the envelope, at the cameras recording everything. Joe's voice cracked. I choose option 2. Walter nodded slowly. Then prove it. Starting now. Joe took a shaky breath, stepped out from behind the counter, and walked to where Walter stood. I'm sorry, Joe said, and for the first time that night, he sounded like he meant it. Not just to you, but to Emma, and to every person I've made feel unwelcome here. I was wrong. I let fear and prejudice guide my decisions instead of decency. He turned to Emma. You're a better person than I've ever been. And you deserved better than the way I've run this place. Emma nodded, still too overwhelmed to speak. Joe turned back to Walter. I'll do whatever it takes to make this right. Good, Walter said. My team will be in touch tomorrow. We'll start with training next week. Within 24 hours, the story exploded. Not because Briggs Foundation released their footage, Walter kept his word to Joe, but because customers in the diner that night had recorded everything on their phones. Billionaire tests diner, waitress passes, owner fails, went viral. 10 million views in 48 hours. News stations called. Morning shows requested interviews. Emma's phone, which she'd had to upgrade because the old one couldn't handle the volume of messages, never stopped buzzing. But Emma didn't do interviews. Not yet. She sat in her tiny apartment above the laundromat, staring at the envelope Walter had given her. $50,000 check. Real. Deposited. Full scholarship letter. Official Briggs Foundation letterhead. Job offer. Signed by Walter himself. She kept waiting to wake up. For this to be a dream. For someone to say, just kidding, you're still broke and working night shifts. But it didn't happen. 3 days after that night, Walter called her personally. Emma, he said, his voice warm. Have you had time to think about the offer? I have, Emma replied. Can I ask you something first? Of course. Why me? You said I was the first in 47 places. But surely other people were kind. Surely someone else. No, Walter interrupted gently. Other people were polite. Professional. Correct. But you were kind. There's a difference. He paused. Politeness is doing what's required. Kindness is doing what's right even when it costs you something. You didn't just buy me food, Emma. You stood up to your boss, risked your job, spent money you couldn't afford to spare, and you sat with me. You listened. You saw me. Emma's throat tightened. That's rare, Walter continued. Rarer than you'd think. And it's exactly what the world needs more of. I'll take the job, Emma said quietly. And the scholarship. And I promise I won't let you down. You couldn't if you tried, Walter replied. Welcome to Briggs Foundation, Emma. Let's change some hearts. 6 months after that November night, Emma Carter stood in front of a conference room filled with hospitality managers from restaurants across Virginia. She wore professional attire now, blazer, slacks, the kind of clothes she used to see on customers and never imagined wearing herself. But she still wore her old diner name tag pinned to her blazer. A reminder of where she came from. Compassionate service, Emma began, her voice steady and clear, isn't about charity. It's about humanity. It's about remembering that every person who walks through your door deserves dignity, whether they're spending $100 or $1. Whether they're dressed in a suit or wearing duct-taped boots. She clicked to the next slide, showing Joe's Roadside Diner, transformed now, with a new sign, everyone welcome here. This establishment failed the test 6 months ago, Emma said. But they chose to change. They implemented a pay-it-forward meal program. They trained staff in trauma-informed service. They posted a policy, no one gets turned away for inability to pay. She clicked again. The slide showed statistics, 500 free meals served in 6 months. 23 veterans connected with VA services. Community donations up 300%. Change is possible, Emma said. But it starts with a choice. The choice to see people instead of problems. To lead with compassion instead of fear. In the back of the room, Walter Briggs watched with pride. Beside him sat Joe Mitchell, who traveled here to share his story, not as a cautionary tale, but as proof of redemption. After the presentation, a young restaurant manager approached Emma nervously. Ms. Carter, she said. I've turned people away before. People who looked like they couldn't pay. I'm ashamed of it now, but I didn't know what else to do. Emma smiled gently. You know now. That's what matters. What will you do differently tomorrow? The manager's eyes filled with determination. Everything. That evening, Emma returned to her new apartment, a real one-bedroom in a safe neighborhood, paid for by her Briggs Foundation salary. But before going inside, she drove to Route 29. To Joe's Roadside Diner. The place looked different now. Cleaner. Brighter. The parking lot was full, a mix of expensive cars and beat-up trucks, everyone welcome. She walked inside. Joe was behind the counter, but he smiled when he saw her. "Emma. What brings you by?" "Just wanted to see it," she said, looking around at the diverse crowd of customers. "Really see it?" In the corner booth, the one where Walter had sat that November night, an elderly woman sat alone, studying the menu with shaking hands. Emma watched as a young waiter approached her. "What can I get you, ma'am?" he asked warmly. "How much is the soup?" the woman asked nervously. The waiter smiled. "How much do you have?" The woman counted coins. $2.80. "Perfect," the waiter said. "That's exactly the price of our daily special, soup, bread, coffee, and pie." The woman's eyes filled with tears. "That's too much food for." "Ma'am," the waiter interrupted gently, "you're our guest. Let us take care of you today." Emma felt her own eyes sting. Joe appeared beside her, watching the same scene. "We do that now," he said quietly. "Every shift. Someone on staff buys a meal for someone who needs it. Sometimes it's us. Sometimes customers do it. But nobody leaves hungry. Ever." "You really changed," Emma said. "You changed me," Joe replied. "By showing me what I should have been all along." As Emma drove home that night, her phone buzzed. A text from Walter. "Saw your presentation. You're a natural. Proud of you. W." She smiled, typed back, "Learned from the best. Thank you for seeing me when I was invisible." His response came immediately, "You were never invisible, Emma. The world just wasn't paying attention. Now it is." Emma pulled into her parking spot, turned off the engine, and sat for a moment in the quiet. 6 months ago, she'd been a broke college student working night shifts, invisible to most of the world. Today, she was changing that world, one restaurant, one training session, one act of compassion at a time. All because she'd bought an $11.47 meal for a stranger who turned out to be anything but. The world needed more kindness. More people who acted when others looked away. More moments where someone chose humanity over policy. And Emma Carter, former night shift waitress, current director of compassionate hospitality at Briggs Foundation, was making sure it happened. One meal. One person. One choice at a time.